Hey guys, tonight we're going to quietly step into a sun-warmed workshop nestled in the heart of 16th century Iznik, where a fine layer of blue dust clings to everything, from the wooden beams above you to the folds of the artist's sleeve as he moves a brush with tranquil purpose. The workshop hums with the soft clink of terracotta tiles stacked against the walls and the gentle scraping of pigments being ground to powder. Light slants through narrow windows, illuminating bowls of crushed minerals that will soon become something quietly spectacular. And no, this isn't one of those stories where battles rage and dynasties collapse every 10 minutes. You're here for the soothing version. Ottoman tile painting didn't burst into history with drama and urgency. It tiptoed, patiently, through centuries of refinement. And it began with blue, just blue, soft, cool cobalt, brushed onto pale clay in deliberate arcs and spirals. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know where are you listening from and what time is it there now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch near a shallow wooden basin, watching a young apprentice swirl a brush dipped in dark blue pigment across the tile's surface. The pattern is simple, just a cluster of stylized leaves, maybe some abstract scrollwork, but it's precise and the tile is still raw, unfired, its body made from a compact mix of red clay and white slip. The blue pigment sinks slightly into the damp surface, leaving a soft blur at the edges. It'll sharpen later, after the glaze, if all goes well. These are the earliest days of what will later be known as Iznik tiles, though right now, no one's calling them that. This is the late 1400s, and tile painting in the Ottoman Empire is still young. The tiles themselves are functional at first, used for fountains, mosque interiors, and decorative wall panels. They're made in small batches. Firing is risky, cracks are common, but the artists persist, drawn by something wordless, a sense that a flat tile can hold a garden. It's not the first time Islamic art has flirted with ceramics. In fact, there's a long tradition across Persia and Central Asia of painted tiles, often using lusterware and cuerda seca techniques, methods that relied on separating colors with oily lines or metallic glazes. But in the Ottoman heartland, those techniques start to give way to something cleaner, underglaze painting. It's simpler, yes, but it offers a kind of softness that suits Ottoman tastes. One brush, one pigment, one gesture, and then a layer of transparent glaze to freeze it forever. Historians still argue whether the true pivot came from technical constraints or aesthetic choices. Was underglaze painting just easier, or did the Ottomans prefer the dreamy, slightly out of focus look it produced either way? Cobalt blue becomes the empire's gentle obsession, imported from Persia. The pigment is expensive and fussy. It has to be ground fine, sifted twice, and mixed with water or gum arabic before application. If the mixture is too thin, the lines blur, too thick, and it clots under the glaze. And yet, for all the fuss, the results are soothing. Those early designs, lotus blossoms, arabesques, palmettes, repeat across tile after tile with rhythmic calm. Some have suggested that the repetition itself was meditative for the artist. Others think it simply fit the broader Islamic aesthetic of avoiding figural imagery and embracing the infinite. You don't need faces to tell a story, just vines, curves, echoes. You trail your fingers along a finished panel leaning against the wall. It's dry now. The glaze faintly crackled. The blue is vibrant where it pooled and softer where it thinned. You notice how the tile is slightly domed in the center, not an accident, just the result of uneven glaze pooling during firing. Every tile has its own character, its own imperfection, and they're never meant to stand alone, like notes in a lullaby. They only work in sequence, over in the corner. An older artisan arranges tiles into a test pattern. He doesn't look up as you approach. He's too focused on spacing, alignment, making sure the pattern carries seamlessly from one tile to the next. These aren't just paintings on ceramic. They're parts of a much bigger picture, one that will cover walls, domes, mihrabs. You sit beside him, watching as he gently turns a tile clockwise, then back again. He explains, softly, as if telling a bedtime story, that each tile's edge must match its neighbor's perfectly, not just in shape, but in rhythm. He calls it visual prayer. You don't ask what he means. You just nod. There's a lull in the workshop as the apprentices stop to stretch. The air is heavy with clay dust and the faint tang of mineral oxides. Someone brings in a copper tray of sweet tea, and you sip yours slowly, looking around. There's no shouting, no hurry, just brushstrokes, fire, and patience. It's easy to romanticize all this, especially from your soft 21st century perch, but the reality was full of trial and error. Cobalt was tricky, clay bodies warped, glazes sometimes bubbled or turned brown in the kiln, and yet, the artist kept going, guided by memory and hand feel more than measurements. Recipes were passed down not through documents, but through touch. You didn't read how to make tiles, you absorbed it, and slowly, quietly, something was forming. A visual language that would come to define the interiors of Ottoman religious spaces, one that spoke not in symbols or portraits, but in rhythm and curve, a style born of blue dust and silence. You lean back against the cool stone wall, staring up at a tile-laden ceiling. It's not flashy, it's not even symmetrical, but there's something about the way the patterns coil and uncoil that feels inevitable, like it's always been here, waiting, and the bluet still hums, centuries later. You wake to the sound of gentle shoveling and low murmurs, and when you step outside the workshop, the hills just beyond the town stretch soft and ochre under the morning sun. A donkey plods along the edge of a footpath, carrying two woven baskets packed full of earth, red clay dug from the banks of a stream just past the olive groves. You follow slowly, your sandals sliding in the loose soil, until you reach the clay pits. Here, the work is humble, silent, and absolutely essential. The red clay of Anatolia isn't just any clay, it's the lifeblood of Ottoman tile painting. Rich in iron and naturally adhesive, it holds shape well during firing and doesn't crack under the glaze. You crouch beside a young worker scooping it into a broad sieve. He nods at you but says nothing. The process is old, patient, and oddly comforting. Water is added, stones are filtered out, and the mud becomes a soft, heavy mass, just pliable enough to shape, just coarse enough to remember that it came from the earth. Historians still debate whether this specific mixture, the perfect balance of red clay and white slip, was the result of local experimentation or adapted from Persian techniques. Whatever the origin, Ottoman craftsmen made it their own. You can feel it in the weight of the raw tiles stacked under a lean-to. Their undersides rough, their surfaces smooth with burnished slip, This is where design begins, not with a sketch, but with the land itself. You help push a wheelbarrow laden with the raw material back toward the workshop, your arms aching slightly. The path winds between small houses and orchards, past women rinsing linens in a well and children racing flat stones across the road. The town doesn't seem particularly concerned with the fact that it's quietly becoming one of the most important ceramic centers of the Islamic world. To them, it's just Iznik. It just is, inside the workshop. Clay preparation takes a few more steps. A seasoned craftsman, his hands stained permanently ochre, kneads the clay like bread dough, pushing and folding it on a thick wooden table. He's not checking a clock or measuring by eye. He's listening to the sound the clay makes when pressed, to the way it holds the knife edge when cut. There's something incredibly calm about watching him work. It's not dramatic. It's not even especially slow. But there's no rush. No one's barking orders. The clay will be ready when it's ready. The entire room seems to take on that rhythm. Once the clay reaches the right consistency, it's shaped into flat squares by hand or with rudimentary molds. You try your hand at one, pressing the heavy, damp clay into a simple wooden frame. It takes a few tries. Your first tile is lopsided, the second too thick, but by the third, something clicks. The edges are clean. The surface is smooth. You feel a quiet satisfaction ripple through you, like you've participated in something timeless. You set the tile aside to dry and notice a row of them already in progress, laid out like sleepy soldiers waiting for inspection. Each will take days to fully dry before it can be painted, glazed, and fired. And not every tile will make it. The ones that crack or warp get recycled, crushed, and reintroduced into the clay. There's a strange tenderness in the way nothing is wasted. While your tiles cure, you're invited to help prepare the slip, a watery white coating made from finer clay and sometimes ground quartz. You stir it slowly in a shallow basin. It's cool to the touch, the consistency of thick cream. This will cover the red tile base and create a smooth, white canvas for painting. When applied correctly, the slip dries with a matte sheen, its surface perfect for catching pigment. You try brushing a thin layer onto a half-dried tile. The slip flows unevenly at first, catching in the edges, but with a steady hand, it smooths out, leaving the surface bright and ready. This step is crucial. The slip's texture affects how the pigment binds. A poorly slipped tile won't hold the pattern. It's the difference between a perfect curve and a smudge. Someone nearby gently corrects your angle. You nod, they don't explain much. But that's part of the culture here. Observation is everything. Most apprentices learn not through instruction, but imitation, watching how the hand moves, how the brush is cleaned, how silence is held while someone paints. It's tempting to think of all this as art, but for the people here, it's also work. Tiles must be made in sets, large commissions, mosques, palaces. Tombs require hundreds, sometimes thousands. No one is signing their name. No one is carving their initials into the back. Fame is not the point. Harmony is. And the harmony begins here, in clay drawn from quiet hillsides, shaped by hand, covered in slip, and left to dry beneath linen cloth. Later, when you pass through the drying room, you catch the faintest crackle as a tile shrinks, tightening slightly in the air. It's not a flaw. It's just the clay whispering to itself, adjusting, preparing, becoming. The next morning begins with smoke, not thick or choking, just a faint gray ribbon curling from a squat chimney near the edge of the courtyard. You follow it instinctively, drawn toward the warm scent of burning olive wood. The kiln is being prepped. A cluster of apprentices stoke the fire beneath a wide brick dome, and the air around you hums with soft crackles and muffled footfalls. No one rushes. Everything in this stage depends on timing, and time doesn't like being bossed around. You crouch beside the master firekeeper, a wiry man with sun-creased eyes who pokes gently at the glowing coals with a long iron rod. The kiln before you isn't towering or fearsome, just wide, low, and slightly uneven, built brick by hand. The arched ceiling curves inward like a turtle shell, and its floor is already half filled with a new load of tiles, each spaced evenly on raised shelves. Ottoman kilns, especially in Iznik, were fired with a quiet precision. Temperature was everything. Too hot, and the glaze would run; too cool, and the pigment would fade. You lean in to feel the heat radiating through a side vent. It's subtle for now, just enough to warm your face. Historians still argue whether early Ottoman ceramicists used thermometric tools or relied entirely on experience. No historical texts clearly outline a measuring device. Most believe they gauged heat by color, observing the glow of the chamber's interior and adjusting fuel accordingly. In a way, it's almost musical. You're not watching a thermometer, you're listening to fire. As the heat slowly rises, you help carry a tray of tiles from the drying racks. Each one is unglazed, its pattern already painted in blue. You're told to be careful not to touch the surface. Any oil or moisture from your hands might cause bubbling. These are underglazed tiles, and once the transparent lead glaze is poured over them, there's no correcting a mistake. The glaze fixes everything, beauty and flaw alike, into permanence. You're allowed to watch as the master prepares the glaze. A fine white powder, mostly lead oxide and ground quartz, is sifted into water until it forms a thin, milky slurry. He stirs it with deliberate, circular motions. A fine film forms on the surface and is skimmed off. It's fragile, this glaze, touchy. It needs to coat each tile evenly, yet lightly, too thick, and it'll pool into unwanted lumps, too thin, and the tile will emerge dull and dry. The tiles are dipped one at a time, or else the glaze is poured and spread across the surface with a flat blade. You try your hand at one and immediately overglaze it, the liquid running too fast off the edge, leaving a streak. No one scolds you. The tile is set aside, and another one takes its place. Everything here allows room for quiet failure. As the glaze settles, it dries to a soft, chalky film, almost ghost-like. You'd never guess that underneath lies a pattern so vivid and precise. The cobalt blue disappears slightly beneath the haze, awaiting the fire to bring it back. Firing happens in stages. The first heat rise is slow, just enough to expel remaining moisture. Then the temperature climbs steadily to around 900 to 1000 degrees Celsius. You feel it in your bones as you sit nearby. The firekeeper adjusts vents and fuel, sometimes waiting an hour before adding more wood. It's a performance of patience. You're invited to peek inside for a moment through a tiny spy hole, just long enough to glimpse the interior walls glowing orange, the shelves trembling faintly from heat. The tiles, now fully veiled in chalky glaze, seem to shimmer in anticipation. You blink away the brightness and step back. The world outside suddenly cool and gray. The firing takes several hours. During that time, Not much happens on the outside, but inside the kiln, a quiet alchemy is unfolding. The glaze melts, fusing with the pigment. The blue deepens, edges sharpen, everything stiffens into place. You eat a small meal while waiting, some bread, a few olives, and lentils spooned from a steaming pot. Everyone around you eats slowly, not because they're tired, but because the kiln insists on a certain pace. After the fire dies down, the kiln is left sealed for a full day to cool. No one opens it early. You're told that impatience can crack the strongest tile. So instead, the day is spent cleaning tools, preparing clay, sketching new patterns. Even the waiting is productive when it's finally time. The master firekeeper opens the kiln. A small puff of warm air escapes, and you feel your heart speed up a little. Even though this isn't your tile, each one is lifted gently with padded gloves and examined. Some tiles come out perfect, sharp lines, bright glaze, not a bubble in sight. Others are less lucky corners curled from heat, glazes that blistered. But even the flawed ones have a certain charm. One tile bears a streak where glaze pulled pigment into a gentle swirl, technically a defect, but it looks like a breeze moving through leaves. You hold it in your hands and think maybe it deserves a place. 2. Not every mistake is a failure. There's a growing pile of finished tiles by the end of the day, laid out on woven mats. They gleam in the late light, blues deep and rich, shining through their crystal glaze like ripples in still water. These tiles will be fitted into panels, perhaps for a mosque wall or palace fountain. Each one is a quiet promise, a piece of earth transformed. You reach for your first successful tile, the one you slipped, painted, and now helped fire. It's warm still, just barely, but its color has settled, and the pattern is whole. It's not flawless, but it's yours. A square of stillness, born from fire. You sit cross-legged near the shelves of finished tiles, watching the blue patterns shimmer under the flickering oil lamps. They're lovely. Of course, vines and blossoms coiling with lazy grace across the white surface. But a question lingers in your mind. Where did this exact look come from? The style doesn't quite match anything you've seen in Arab lands, nor is it identical to earlier Persian tiles. There's something distinctly borrowed, not stolen, not copied, more like gently adapted. An elder artist notices your gaze and smiles knowingly. He walks over with a tile in hand, not one of theirs, but something older, glossier, with a crisp white body and fluid cobalt design. He lays it beside the Iznik piece, and you immediately see it. The resemblance is undeniable. Chinese porcelain, specifically. It's the Ming Dynasty blue and white ware that traveled west through Silk Road caravans and maritime trade routes. Ottoman elite, sultans, viziers, and wealthy patrons adored the clarity of those Chinese wares, the whiteness of the clay, the depth of the blue, the serenity of the motifs. And while Iznik's tiles weren't made from porcelain, they didn't have the same kaolin-rich clays. The influence soaked in like water into sponge. Historians still debate whether Chinese imports directly transformed Ottoman ceramic design, or if the resemblance emerged more gradually through Persian intermediaries. Some say Ottoman potters simply responded to demand. Others argue the shift was intentional, a blend of admiration and imperial ambition. After all, what better way to reflect the Ottoman Sultan's global reach than by echoing the most prized ceramics of the East? You run your fingers along a painted vine. The curve is Ottoman, but the spacing, the negative space around the motif. That's something that clearly tips its hat to Chinese elegance. You start seeing it everywhere now. The early Iznik plates, those from the 15th and early 16th centuries, carry tightly coiled spirals, cloud bands, and border designs that echo Ming dishes almost note for note. The influence wasn't just visual, it was also technical. Chinese potters were masters of underglazed blue on a white ground. Ottoman artisans, with their iron-rich clays, couldn't achieve that bright whiteness. So they faked it, cleverly. They covered their red clay bodies with a slip made from finely ground white material, creating the illusion of porcelain. And you'd never guess unless you flipped the tile over. You step outside for some air, the workshop still fragrant with heat and minerals. A group of merchants has arrived in town, bringing silks and spices and porcelain shards wrapped in linen. They trade them like treasures. Each fragment is examined, compared, admired. One of the Iznik painters sits gestures toward a bull rim and sketches a motif onto a scrap of paper. It'll show up on a tile next week. Inspiration traded by sea. There's something almost funny about the global loop. Blue and white porcelain began in China, using cobalt imported from Persia. Then that same Persian pigment traveled west, and Ottoman artisans used it to imitate Chinese forms, which had, in a roundabout way, started with Persian techniques. It's less a straight line and more a gentle spiral, like the motifs they paint. Later that evening, you join the artists for tea beneath a fig tree. One of them describes the peculiar joy of painting vines. He doesn't copy directly. He improvises, lets the line wander, loop, return. He talks about balance, not symmetry, but something subtler, a sense of calm when the tile feels complete. You glance back at the newest pieces stacked in the drying racks. They're still just blue and white, like always. But now you notice things you didn't before: the slight looseness in the leaves, the open breathing room between elements, the way the vines don't feel confined by the square. Chinese restraint, Ottoman rhythm. The next morning, you help organize finished tiles for packing. Some are bound for palaces, others for mosques in far-off provinces. A few are gifts. The painter you spoke to yesterday quietly slips a sketch into your satchel, a simple design, traced in faint charcoal. He says nothing, just nods. Maybe it's a vine he drew, maybe it's from a bowl he admired once in a merchant's hand. Either way, it's yours now, a borrowed thing, made new again. You run your thumb along the edge of a tile as it's wrapped in straw. The blue hums beneath the glaze like a held breath. Not Chinese, not Persian. Something else entirely. Something that can only be described as Ottoman. You walk through the corridors of Topkapi Palace just after sunrise. The marble floor cool beneath your feet, and the domed ceilings catching soft amber light through latticed windows. The palace is awake, but only just. Guards murmuring in corners, servants padding silently through arches, the garden fountain whispering just beyond the colonnade. And here, among all this stillness and formality, tile painters wait, because nothing drives artistic ambition quite like a sultan's specific tastes. When Ottoman tile painting truly flourished, it did so not in isolation, but under patronage. And in the 16th century, that meant Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, a ruler with a keen eye for architectural harmony and a deep love for symbolic ornamentation. Suleiman didn't just want walls, he wanted visual theology. Every surface in his commissioned buildings became part of an ideological whisper, and tiles were a soft but constant voice in that chorus. You're shown into a smaller chamber, lightly furnished, scrolls stacked on a low shelf, a design board stretched out across a narrow table. Here, one of the court's favored architects, perhaps even Mimar Sinan himself, has drafted patterns and elevations. Next to the architectural drawings are swatches of tile samples, each tagged in delicate script with notes deeper blue, remove pomegranate motif, add tulip by corner arch. This is where style shifts are quietly codified, not from the workshop up, but from the palace down. It's tempting to believe art just happens, flowing freely from inspiration and pigment. But in truth, it often trickles through hierarchies. Sultans, viziers, architects, and patrons all had a say. They might not mix glaze or carry clay, but their preferences rippled outward. When a vizier requested tulips in his prayer niche, tulips began blooming across entire neighborhoods of tilework within a year. Historians still argue whether this court-driven aesthetic control limited artistic freedom or simply refined it. Some claim it narrowed what artists were allowed to attempt. Others suggest it focused Ottoman ceramicists, encouraging them to elevate decorative standards rather than abandon them to personal whim. You stroll past a corridor tiled in repeating floral arabesques, each more intricate than the last. They aren't chaotic. There's a visual discipline at work, symmetry across panels, consistent spacing between motifs, careful coordination between tile color and architectural element. You run your hand along one vine. It ends in a stylized tulip, a flower that became so popular under Sultan Ahmed's later reign that the entire tulip era was named after it. You're invited to observe a presentation of new tile samples for a mosque under construction. Courtiers gather around low tables while a few tile painters unroll their proposed designs, paper sheets painted with possible color schemes and motifs. There's a delicate tension in the room, like a chess match made of pigment and politeness. Someone in silk robes suggests more red. Another prefers a return to the older blue and white simplicity. A third wants the calligraphic elements to be larger, easier to read from afar. The tile makers say very little. They know how the process works. Their job is to translate wishes into glaze, later, back in the workshop. You hear the mutterings, how a single request from a palace official means recalibrating a glaze batch, redrawing templates, even reconfiguring kiln schedules. But there's no complaint, just resignation. The palace may not wield a paintbrush, but it certainly wields a compass and a budget. You pause beside a young apprentice sketching new layout grids. His tools are simple: a compass, a fine brush, a steady hand. He works in silence, copying court-approved motifs into repeating sequences. His expression isn't bored, it's serene. There's a quiet comfort in drawing what is already known. You start to realize that for Ottoman tile makers, creativity wasn't chaos, it was refinement. The joy wasn't in inventing something brand new, but in executing something exquisitely well. A tulip. Yes, but the perfect tulip. A border pattern so seamless it could wrap around the entire dome without misaligning by even a finger's width. That evening, walking once more through the palace garden, you notice how the architecture and the tiles echo each other. Curves in the arches mirror curves in the vines. The rhythm of window grills repeats in arabesques. Even the fountains murmur in sync with the tile work around them. It's not just decoration, it's orchestration, and as the garden lamps begin to glow, you think maybe tile painting didn't become beautiful because of royal control. Maybe it became beautiful because everyone, potter, painter, sultan, apprentice, was part of the same slow, deliberate conversation. The next day finds you crouched over a fresh, slip coated tile, brush in hand, studying the first curve of a leaf, not a real leaf. Of course, no Ottoman artist was trying to mimic nature exactly. These were ideal leaves abstracted, stylized, curled into symmetry, repeated across domes, arches, and mihrabs like whispered refrains. You dip the brush into the inky cobalt and draw the first stroke. It's harder than it looks. Ottoman floral motifs evolved slowly but deliberately in the early Iznik period. The designs were still stiff, tight rosettes, cautious spirals, but over time, artists began to favor more fluid, elongated elements, tulips swaying, carnations blooming, seize leaves slicing elegantly across compositions like sharp breezes. You try your hand at a saz leaf now. It's a long, serrated form, borrowed originally from Central Asian scrollwork, but perfected in Ottoman hands. Your first attempt droops awkwardly. The second one leans too far left. The third almost works. You finally feel the rhythm, the flick of the wrist at the end of the curve, the pause before the second stem. The leaf settles into the tile like it was always meant to be there. A master painter glances over your shoulder, offers no praise, no correction, just a small nod. That's enough. The floral vocabulary here is rich but precise. Tulips stand tall and closed, sometimes with inner petals. Carnations are more open, sometimes even serrated. Hyacinths twist a little, roses sit symmetrically, and then there are the composite flowers, fantasy blooms made from a mix of elements, purely decorative, but deeply Ottoman. Historians still argue whether these composite blossoms held symbolic meaning or were purely aesthetic. Some suggest coded metaphors, tulips for paradise, carnations for divine love. Others believe the combinations were simply the result of artistic play, a palette reshuffled, not deciphered. You sit beside an artist painting a full panel. She moves slowly, without hesitation. The composition unfolds like a quiet dance tulip, saz leaf, hyacinth, vine. Each form follows a rhythm. Nothing overlaps clumsily. Every gap is deliberate. Even the negative space feels friendly. You ask how long it took her to learn. She smiles. I'm still learning. There's a reason Ottoman tile painting avoided chaos in an empire of many peoples, languages, and geographies. Visual harmony served as a kind of shared calm. Walk into a mosque in Istanbul or one in Damascus or Edirne, and you'd find the same calm tulips rising up the walls, same saz leaves curling toward the dome, same interlocking vines. It was as if the walls breathed together. You take a break in the courtyard, sipping water from a clay cup. Across from you, stacked against the wall, are dozens of rejected tiles, not cracked or ruined, just off. The blue faded in one, the glaze pooled in another. A leaf veered too far right. You hold one in your lap. It's still beautiful. You overhear a discussion among the senior painters. One has received a commission to create a large panel for a tomb interior. The challenge it must include not just floral motifs, but also integrate symbolic geometry and calligraphy. A full visual poem. You're quietly invited to assist, not with the final painting, of course, but to trace outlines onto blank tiles using a paper stencil. Even this tracing requires concentration. The stencil must align perfectly from tile to tile. You hold it down with small weights and dust a charcoal across the punched holes, revealing the faint outlines. It's like drawing from a ghost, but once you lift the paper, the design shimmers faintly in gray. Later, you'll see these tiles glazed and painted, but now, in their fragile pencil form, they look almost whispered, like something still deciding whether to be real. In the quiet of the evening, you revisit a tiled corridor from a nearby mosque, each panel a garden frozen in blue, green, and red. You follow the vines with your eyes. They twist, but never tangle. Each curve leads into another. The tulips nod toward the carnations. The saz leaves reach past the borders, but never breach them. It's not wild. It's not restrained. It's balanced. And as you rest your hand on the cool glazed surface, the pattern reflecting a faint version of your shape, you think there's nothing accidental about any of this. These flowers were planned, practiced, rehearsed until they sang in silence. You walk away gently, careful not to break the rhythm. You're up early the next day, long before the town fully wakes, in the pre-dawn stillness. The workshop is already stirring. Someone's hammering gently behind the kiln room. Someone else is sifting powder through cloth. But today, it's not the pigment or the paint that takes center stage. It's something far less glamorous and far more essential: powdered quartz. You step into the materials room and are hit with a faint metallic tang in the air. Bowls of crushed minerals line the shelves: cobalt oxide for blue, copper for green, iron for brown. But in the center of it all sits a large sack of ground quartz, pale, shimmery, unassuming. Ottoman tile makers, especially in Iznik, didn't settle for average surfaces. They wanted something bright, translucent, luminous even under dim light. To achieve this, they developed a uniquely high silica body composition, adding finely ground quartz to their ceramic paste and their glazes. This single shift changed everything. You watch as an apprentice begins to stir quartz powder into the glaze slurry, sifting it slowly so it doesn't clump. The quartz helps stabilize the mixture, prevents bubbling during firing, and most importantly, creates a glossy, glass-like surface when melted. It gives the tiles that special clarity you've been admiring all along. Historians still argue whether this particular recipe, the high quartz Iznik formula, was developed locally through experimentation or influenced by older Persian footwear traditions. Either way, by the mid-1500s, the Iznik workshops had made it their own, and with it came that unmistakable shimmer. You're handed a chunk of raw quartz to examine, milky white, with a faint pinkish glow. It doesn't look like art. It looks like geology, but under the pestle and mortar, it becomes something transformative. Hours are spent grinding, sifting, washing. There are no shortcuts. If the particles are too coarse, the tile's surface feels gritty, too fine, and the glaze runs. There's a perfect in-between, learned by hand, never written down. Later, as the glaze is prepared for a new batch of underglazed tiles, you assist in pouring it carefully across the painted surfaces. The blue designs look dull and chalky beneath the white liquid, but you know now it's not the glaze's job to shine yet. That comes after fire. Right now, it's just protection, a thin promise of what's to come. A tile maker nearby tests a small square with an experimental formula, more quartz this time, less lead. The glaze is thicker, risky. You raise your eyebrows, and he shrugs. Sometimes. You try something. He says, sometimes. It cracks. You admire the courage of that, the willingness to lose a day's work on a guess. But without guesses, there'd be no gleam. You spend the afternoon helping sort through a freshly fired kiln load. Some tiles shine like river stones, their glaze pulled tight over the curves. Others have dulled edges or cloudy spots where the quartz didn't melt properly. You start to see the difference instantly now, where the chemistry succeeded, where it hesitated. In one corner of the studio, a stack of especially glossy tiles catches your attention. Their blues are deeper, their whites nearly glowing. You're told these are for a dome interior, where light barely reaches. The shine matters more there. It catches stray sunbeams and amplifies them. These tiles will not be seen up close, yet the artists finish them as if every visitor will inspect each centimeter. That's the point. You help pack them gently into straw-filled crates. The surface is so smooth, it almost feels wet. You resist the urge to touch them too much. Even the natural oils on your fingertips might leave a trace. Later, over bread and olives, someone jokes about the workshop's obsession with shimmer. We don't make tiles. He laughs. We make quiet mirrors. You smile. It's not far from the truth. Ottoman tiles aren't flashy or gilded. They don't sparkle like jewels, but they glow, softly, persistently, like lanterns in a fog. That night, as the moonlight slips across the roofline, you hold up a single tile to catch the reflection. The floral pattern, blues and greens wrapped in delicate vines, gleams gently under the glaze. Beneath your thumb, the surface is perfectly smooth. No bumps, no grit, just centuries of patience, all because someone, long ago, decided that crushed quartz, ground rock, deserved a second life as light. You return to the workshop the next morning to find an unusual quiet. Brushes sit still in their jars, the fire's not yet lit. The apprentices are whispering around a low table, passing around something small, carefully wrapped in linen. You lean in to look. It's a tile, but not just any tile. This one pulses with color. In the center of a sea of soft blue and gentle green, there burns a deep, glowing red. Not rusty, not brown, red. You stare. It looks almost alive. This, they tell you, is the elusive Armenian bull red, kuzil, as they sometimes call it. It's the color that changed everything, and also the one that nearly broke the workshops until the mid-16th century. Ottoman tiles were mostly blue and white, sometimes green, occasionally black. The glazes behaved, the pigments cooperated, but red refused. It ran. It faded. It reacted strangely in the kiln. Dozens of tests failed. Patterns bled. Designs cracked. But then something shifted. Around the 1550s, tile makers in Iznik finally stabilized a version of iron-rich red using a clay called Armenian bull. The red was applied thickly, in relief, almost like an enamel. It sat on top of the tile surface, slightly raised under the final glaze, and when fired correctly, when everything aligned, it didn't just work. It shone. You try applying some yourself, under the cautious eye of a painter. The bowl is thicker than cobalt, less like ink, more like paste. You spread it carefully across the petals of a tulip. Watching it cling to the white slip, it dries quickly, and once it does, there's no correcting it. If you smudge it, the entire tile is discarded. Historians still argue how the Iznik artisans finally cracked the formula. Was it a local potter who experimented with firing sequences, or a Persian emigre who brought an old trick with him? The records don't say. But by the time Süleymaniye Mosque was completed in Istanbul in the late 1550s, its interiors bore rich red tulips twined with blue saz leaves. The bowl had bloomed. You walk through a drying room now filled with red accented panels. It's strange. Just a splash of crimson changes the entire mood, where the earlier blue and white pieces felt serene, almost cold. These new tiles feel warm. They glow under oil lamplight. The red draws your eye, then leads you back through the vines, into the design. It doesn't shout, but it insists. It wasn't an easy victory, even with the right mixture. The red needed precise handling. The paint layer had to be thick enough to rise through the glaze, but not so thick that it blistered. Firing had to be exact. Most workshops failed more than they succeeded, but when it worked, it changed everything. You peek into an archive chest and find a batch of discarded tiles where the red ran sideways, turned brown, disappeared entirely, each a quiet heartbreak. You wonder how many weeks were lost in pursuit of that one perfect glow. The tile makers laugh softly at your expression. It's always like this, one says. Red is stubborn. It wants to be alone. Not everyone embraced it. Some clients preferred the older palette. Others demanded more red than was practical. The master painters often walked a narrow path between ambition and disaster. But the bowl remained a symbol, proof that the Iznik workshops weren't just copying motifs, they were innovating. You pass a mural panel mid-assembly. The composition is breathtaking tulips with deep red petals stretched toward curling blue leaves, all framed in green vine loops and punctuated by soft black calligraphy. The red doesn't dominate. It lifts the entire thing. That evening, after the apprentices have gone, you find a fragment tile resting near the kiln, just a broken corner, part of a tulip. The bowl is thick there, raised like a lip of glaze. You rub it gently with your thumb. It catches the lamplight and glows, not bright, but bold. It's hard to believe that this red once caused so much frustration. It looks effortless now, but you know better. This tile is a survivor, not of battle, but of chemistry, and somehow that feels just as impressive. The next morning, you step into a space that feels more like a temple than a workshop. High walls rise around you, every surface blanketed in color and curve. You've entered Rustam Pasha Mosque, small by imperial standards, but tile-covered in a way that almost defies belief. Every inch, from the entrance arch to the mihrab at the far end, breathes pattern, tulips nodding, carnations curling, calligraphy whispering along the edges. You tilt your head and just stare. This is where the workshop's quiet tiles come alive, not in stacks or crates, but in place, installed one beside another, assembled like verses in a silent poem. You step slowly through the courtyard, letting the visuals unfold. You see your training now, your understanding sharpened by hours of grinding quartz, tracing vines, dodging red pigments. The full tile panel isn't just pretty, it's engineered. Every section must align with the architecture curved domes, arched doorways, segmented walls. The tiles aren't merely decorative, they're architectural skin at Rustam Pasha. The effect is overwhelming in the gentlest way possible. You pause beside a massive wall of repeating patterns. It looks seamless from afar, but up close, you notice the individual tiles, the hairline spacing, the microscopic shifts. You place your hand on one, the cool glaze, the raised bowl, the way the blue softens toward the edge. You can almost hear the kiln breathe. It's easy to think that such installations happened in bursts, teams of artists and workers slapping tiles onto mortar. But no, the process was meticulous. Panels were designed on paper first, full scale. Each tile was painted, glazed, and fired with its final position in mind. A floral panel couldn't just be close to correct. The stems had to match. The vines had to loop cleanly from tile to tile. Historians still argue whether Rustem Pasha was the peak of Iznik tiling or merely a prelude to later works. Some say it represents the perfection of the craft. Others believe its intensity signaled the beginning of overproduction. Too much red, too many motifs, too much pressure. You lean back against a stone column and squint up at the dome. Even there, above your head, barely visible, tails shimmer in pale light. They weren't made to be admired up close. They were made for presence, a kind of atmospheric peace that settles into the mind the way incense settles in air. And then there's the sound, the way the tiles interact with it. When the imam speaks or a foot shuffles across the carpet, the echoes soften, the glazed surfaces, somehow, don't make the room louder. They hold the sound gently. You sit on the floor, among other visitors, none of whom speak loudly. The tiles command a hush, not by force, but by ambiance. You feel it, the quiet that comes not from emptiness, but from fullness. A room full of vines and flowers that somehow makes people lower their voices. One of the tile makers from the workshop joins you. He gestures toward the panel behind the mihrab. 7 weeks. He whispers, "We painted it in 7 weeks. 47 tiles. No break. You blink. You try to imagine that. Day after day of leaf after leaf, tulip after tulip, all perfectly aligned. Your wrist aches just thinking about it. And yet, it worked. In the outer hallway, you pass a mosaic where older, broken tiles have been reused. You stop. You recognize some of the patterns. Unfinished vines, slightly misaligned reds, even a blotch of glaze too thick. These are the workshop's near misses. They're seconds. And here, they've been reborn into new harmony, not wasted, rewritten. You reach the exit and turn back. The entire space seems to glow now, not just from sunlight or oil lamps, but from centuries of glaze. The mosque doesn't shine like a palace. It breathes like a forest, quiet, rooted, ornate without being noisy. And for the first time, you see the Iznik tiles not as individual artworks, but as a single voice, long, flowing, and meant to be heard through your eyes as you leave the tile-covered stillness of Rustem Pasha Mosque. Your eyes adjust to the sunlit street outside. The patterns linger behind your eyelids, those soft tulips, the quiet glow of red bole, the mirrored vines looping in infinite rhythm. But your day isn't finished. You're headed to a smaller, plainer workshop now, one where the brushstrokes don't mimic petals, but letters. You step inside and immediately hear the faint scratch of a reed pen. The room is cooler, quieter than the others, fewer colors, no trays of crushed pigment, just black ink, white slip, and the graceful curve of Arabic calligraphy arcing across a drying tile. Here, the art is not botanical, it's sacred. Calligraphy was always central to Islamic visual culture, but in tile work, it became something even more striking. Verses from the Quran, names of God, lines of poetry, all were transformed into flowing shapes that danced across domes and portals. Sometimes they hovered over floral fields, sometimes they framed entire doorways, but always they brought gravity and grace. You sit beside a scribe turned painter, tracing a phrase in Thuluth script onto a tile. His brush is impossibly thin. The letters seem to glide, bending and stretching like silk in water. He pauses often, not because he's uncertain, but because the space between letters matters just as much as the letters themselves. Historians still argue whether the rise of calligraphic tile decoration reflected a deeper religious shift or simply an artistic one. Some point to increased mosque patronage in the 16th century. Others believe the growing popularity of the art form simply allowed tile makers to participate in sacred writing without becoming scribes themselves. You try your hand at a single word, Bismillah, in the name of God. The brush trembles slightly in your grip. You focus on the curve of the ba, the delicate flick of the scene. It's harder than you expected. Each letter has weight, direction, grace. There's no freestyle here, just a strict beauty, carefully rehearsed. The artist next to you doesn't correct your form. He simply points to a finished tile and smiles. There, the same word blooms, surrounded by tiny tulips and saz leaves. It's not a clash, it's a duet. You begin to notice how often script appears in Ottoman tile work, not just in mosques, but in fountains, tombs, palace courtyards, sometimes. It's tightly packed Kufic lettering forming geometric frames. Other times, it's flowing thuluth, curling across panels like vines of its own. You see panels that repeat the same word 12 times, each version slightly different, not lazy repetition, devotional rhythm. You help prepare a batch of calligraphic tiles for firing. The black pigment used for script behaves differently than cobalt blue or bull red. It doesn't need to rise through glaze or shimmer. It just needs to stay legible. And yet, when the glaze settles over it, the black ink deepens to charcoal, cool, elegant, permanent. Someone shows you a mistake, an early tile where one stroke curved too far, distorting the word's meaning. The entire tile was discarded, not for aesthetics, but for reverence. When you're writing divine names, precision isn't decorative, it's sacred. There's also a tile fragment kept near the kiln, scorched on one side. No script remains visible, but when held to the light, a faint outline emerges, possibly a line of poetry, maybe from Rumi, maybe from a palace wall long gone. No one knows for sure, but the painters keep it anyway. As a reminder, not everything survives intact, but traces speak, too. As the day ends, you join a team laying out script tiles for a mosque entrance arch. Each piece must align perfectly, not just in shape, but in flow. Arabic calligraphy, after all, doesn't stop at tile edges. It rolls, it glides. One tile's aleph must meet the next tile's lam without breaking pace. You stand back to admire the full panel once it's arranged black script across white glaze, framed by a red floral border. The text reads like a breath. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. You exhale. Maybe it's true. You return to the workshop courtyard late in the afternoon, expecting the usual clatter of glaze bowls and soft brushstrokes. But today, the rhythm has changed. The kiln sits cold. Paint trays are stacked, unused. The apprentices aren't sketching or grinding pigment. Instead, they're packing crates, not with new tiles, with tools, with ledgers, with memories. You look around. Dust has settled over corners that were once busy. Fewer orders, fewer commissions. The master's bench is empty. A quiet truth hums beneath every movement something is ending. The decline of Iznik tile production didn't happen in a single catastrophe. There was no fire, No invasion, no collapse. It faded gently, like a breath exhaled too long by the early 1600s. The empire's wealth was shifting, its priorities changing. Palaces still needed tiles, but fewer. Mosques were still built, but with simpler finishes. Budgets shrank. Fashions moved. Historians still argue what caused the downturn. Some blame silver devaluation, which hit artisan wages hard. Others point to changes in taste, European influence creeping into Ottoman architecture, or a new focus on painted plaster instead of glazed tile. A few simply say the glory years were over. Style had moved on. You follow a pair of apprentices wheeling out a cart filled with old molds. Some are cracked. Others still bear the impression of tulips, vines, tiny calligraphic flourishes. They're being sent to storage, maybe forever. No one says so directly, but you feel it. Inside, a small team continues to work, more out of habit than necessity. A young woman applies cobalt to a tile, though no one has asked for it. An elder trims the edges of a panel meant for a mosque whose funding may never arrive. The room feels like a museum, still pretending it's a studio. You sit with the foreman, sipping thin tea. He doesn't speak much, but he opens a ledger. The pages tell the story clearly. Commissions once steady and lavish now come only occasionally, and with tight constraints. Materials cost more. Red Bull is almost never requested. Even cobalt, once imported freely, is rationed. It's not just us, he says at last. All the workshops are slowing. You think about all the time you've spent here, about the red that was so hard to master, the quartz that shimmered, the tiles that whispered from mosque walls. None of it disappears. Exactly. But the rhythm is quieter now. The notes come further apart. Outside, children run across the square. They don't stop to look at the workshop. To them, it's just another doorway. The idea that it once pulsed with imperial commissions and religious poetry doesn't seem real. And maybe that's how it always goes. Art blooms, and then it rests. Someone shows you a letter from Istanbul. A court architect is requesting a simpler design, fewer colors, quicker firing. The team agrees. No one protests. But in the corner of the room, a painter silently finishes a tile with the full floral array: red, green, blue, black. No shortcuts. It might never be installed, but it will be finished. You sit beside her as she lays down the final stroke, a looping saz leaf that curls right to the edge. She breathes out softly, then closes the pigment bowl. Later, as you walk back through the workshop for what might be the last time, you pause beside a drying rack where older tiles are stacked. Extras, misfires, test pieces. You touch one, it's cool, silent, unfired. It's waiting for a future that may not come, but in its white surface, you still see the ghost of vines, a curve, a bloom, the outline of everything that once was. You leave the hushed quiet of Iznik and journey eastward through gently rolling hills, where pottery wheels still turn and kilns still warm the morning air. But here, in the town of Kütahya, the rhythm is different, smaller, less formal, more survival than glory. The Iznik decline wasn't the end of Ottoman tilework. It simply shifted the center as court tastes moved on and funding dried up. Other towns, especially Kütahya, kept the flame alive, not with red bowl perfection or elaborate mosque domes, but with humble domestic tiles, plates for local markets, and folkier designs meant for homes instead of empires. You step into a courtyard where a Kütahya artisan is painting a simple bowl. No tulips here, No script, just spirals, pomegranates, and curious little birds rendered in uneven cobalt. The glaze pools slightly around the edges. The design wobbles. But it's charming, intimate, the kind of tile you'd eat beside, not prey beneath. Kütahya's output never tried to compete with Iznik's imperial polish. Instead, it found strength in personality. While Iznik painters followed palace directives, Kütahya artists followed instinct. One tile might combine classical Ottoman motifs with Armenian floral touches. Another might feature local Christian iconography beside saz leaves. Historians still argue whether Kütahya's ceramics represent a continuation of Ottoman tradition or a hybrid style born of necessity. Some see it as decline, others as evolution. You, sitting beside a child quietly stamping patterns into soft clay, decide it's neither. It's just a new voice, humming the same melody in a different key. You visit a workshop nestled beside an apricot orchard. Inside, the space feels improvisational, shelves overflowing, glazed bowls stacked without labels, half-finished designs scattered across the table. But the painter working there moves with confidence. He sketches a pomegranate tree with leaves that curl too tightly, then corrects them mid-stroke. The result feels alive in a way that perfection sometimes doesn't. You help prepare a batch of glaze. This time, the recipe is simpler, less quartz, less shine. These tiles aren't meant for distant mosques. They're for homes, tombs, occasionally small provincial mosques that can't afford Iznik's brilliance. But they carry something that Iznik sometimes lost: whimsy. One tile shows a tulip growing out of a fish's mouth. Another frames a rooster with a halo of carnations. None of it would pass muster in Topkapi Palace. But here, it makes people smile. You sit in on a firing day. The kiln loaded with bowls, tiles, pitchers. No grand panels, just small, human pieces. Someone plays a reed flute outside. A neighbor delivers lunch, soup, fresh bread, a plum tart wrapped in cloth. The air smells of clay, herbs, and summer dust. No one's in a hurry. You flip through old tiles stored in a crate near the back wall. Some are over a century old, a few bare dates, one from 1723, another from 1810. None are flawless, but every piece feels like it belongs to a hand, not a system, a person. You meet a family who's been making tiles here for 5 generations. Their great-grandfather once tried to imitate Iznik's red, but never quite succeeded. He made a good orange. The grandson laughs. Close enough. They still use his old molds, slightly warped from age. The imperfections have become tradition. As the sun begins to dip behind the orchard, you sit on a low wall beside a tiled fountain. The water bubbles softly. The tiles shimmer just a little in the fading light. Not brilliant like Iznik, not flawless, but warm, personal. They feel like conversation rather than proclamation. You reach into your satchel and pull out one of the Iznik sketches, cobalt vines twining around a calligraphic phrase. You show it to one of the Kütahya artists. He studies it quietly, then smiles and begins drawing something in response: a saz leaf. Yes, but with a bird sitting on its stem, a gift, a joke, a nod to what came before, and for the first time, you stop thinking of Iznik as an ending. It was just one chapter. You travel again, this time not through countryside or kilns, but through decades. The century has turned. The Ottoman Empire is bending under its own weight. Railways now cross Anatolia. Steamships arrive in Istanbul daily, their hulls packed with letters, goods, and European collectors with very particular tastes. You find yourself in a cramped shop near the Galata docks. The windows are crowded with old tiles, not new ones, not fresh from the kiln. These are removed from fountains, fallen from walls, chipped at the corners, yet they sell fast. Western visitors, ambassadors, scholars, wealthy travelers have begun to crave a piece of the Orient, and nothing says elegant, exotic, and faintly mysterious like a 16th century Iznik tile, wrapped in muslin and labeled genuine. You help rewrap a batch of tiles just removed from an old dervish lodge. The seller doesn't flinch at the loss. They weren't using them. He shrugs. Better in Paris than in the rain. You want to argue, but you can't. Not exactly. Historians still argue about this period, whether the rise in tile collecting was cultural theft or cultural preservation. Some see it as opportunism. Others note that Western interest helped Ottoman ceramic arts gain global recognition. Either way, workshops that once painted for mosques now paint for museums. You pass a crate marked London with tiles packed in sawdust. They're good pieces. Cobalt swirls, red tulips, a whole corner panel depicting the mihrab motif. You recognize the style Rustam Pasha. Someone pried it out, sold it off, and now it will sit behind glass in the British Museum. The irony isn't lost on you. Still, not all exports are ancient. Some are newly made in the old style. You meet a painter who reproduces Iznik designs with almost alarming accuracy. His workshop smells of varnish and ambition. European buyers don't seem to mind whether the tiles are 300 years old or 3 weeks old, as long as they look authentic. You help him fire a panel destined for Berlin, a set of floral tiles modeled after Topkapi's harem corridor. He works from an 1850s French illustration. They like tulips, he mutters, always tulips. You ask if it bothers him. He shrugs. It keeps the kiln warm. One afternoon, a curator from Vienna arrives with a leather portfolio of sketches. He's assembling a catalog of Oriental decorative arts. You flip through pages of tiles that look hauntingly familiar. Rustam, a Dirna, a fountain long since demolished. He doesn't ask who painted them. He asks how much. You realize something strange. These tiles, once created anonymously, now fetch high prices when attributed, even incorrectly, to named schools or eras. The artistry becomes currency, reputation, heritage reduced to decor. You visit an estate near the Bosphorus where a collector has lined a sitting room with Ottoman tiles, bright, brilliant, and out of context. The room smells of cigars and lacquered wood. The tiles look orphaned. Their vines loop over velvet wallpaper. Tulips peek from behind armchairs. And yet, when you sit alone in the room later, you still feel the old pull. The curves are the same. The glaze still shines. The echo of the kiln lives in them, even stripped from their original meaning. They haven't gone silent, somewhere in Paris. A young artist is inspired by one of these tiles and sketches a floral motif into a wallpaper pattern. In Boston, a museum guide tells the story of Ottoman domes while visitors crane their necks at a tile fragment under glass. In Tokyo, a copy of that British Museum catalog spurs a ceramist to explore underglaze painting. You start to think maybe these pieces haven't disappeared. Maybe they've just scattered, like pollen, and wherever they land, something blooms. You return to Istanbul decades later, though it's a changed city now. The empire has fallen, a republic has risen, and somewhere between reform and rupture, old crafts have been swept into quiet corners, but not all of them. In a basement near the Bosphorus, You find a workshop that hums with life, not crowded, not loud, but stubbornly alive. The painter at the wheel isn't dressed in silk robes or Ottoman caftans. He wears jeans and a dust-stained apron, yet on the tile beneath his brush, a tulip unfurls the same way it always has. Tile painting didn't vanish, it just changed addresses. You sit beside a young apprentice, her nails chipped with cobalt, her hands steady. She isn't reproducing old panels. She's painting a modern design, a saz leaf. Yes, but intersected by broken geometric bands. It's not imperial. It's not palace approved. It's hers. You wander through shelves of recent works. Some mimic Iznik traditions almost precisely. Others flirt with abstraction, red splashes that bloom but don't outline. Calligraphy deconstructed into motion rather than message. The glazes are still rich with quartz, the blues still pulse, the reds, stubborn as ever, still require coaxing. Historians still argue whether this is a revival or a reinvention. Is it a return to tradition, or a new form using the same tools? Some say it's a pale echo of imperial glory. Others see it as proof that craft never truly dies. It just mutates. You assist in mixing a glaze batch with a young ceramicist who talks about YouTube tutorials and 16th century pigment ratios in the same breath. She teaches workshops on weekends and sometimes sells tiles with saz motifs etched into laptop cases. It's not sacred work, but it's connected. You help prepare a set of tiles destined for a local cafe, not a mosque, not a palace, just a sunlit corner where people sip tea and tap on their phones. The owner wanted something traditional, but not too heavy. The final panels are a mixed tulips stretched toward stylized birds, and a vine curls playfully around a coffee cup motif. You wouldn't find this in Topkapi, but you would recognize the brushwork. There's pride in this revival, not nostalgia. Exactly, but continuity, a willingness to honor the rhythm without copying the whole song. Some of the painters study old archives, others experiment with glaze chemistry, still trying to achieve the mythical perfect red. Everyone here is chasing something between memory and invention. One evening, you visit a kiln opening. The air is heavy with anticipation. Tiles are removed slowly, carefully, their glazes still warm and faintly glowing. Some pieces are failures, cracked, bubbled, muddied in color. Others come out stunning, flawless vines, perfect curve alignments, blues so deep they feel like dusk. Someone cheers, someone else sighs. You help polish a final tile, a modern panel painted with 16th century discipline. The curve of a saz leaf is so crisp it almost looks drawn on glass. You ask the painter if she'll sell it. She shakes her head. Not this one. This one's for my wall. You smile. Of course it is. As you walk home through a street where new apartments rise beside crumbling Ottoman mansions, you pass a small gallery. In the window, under soft light, sits a single tile, cobalt vines, raised bowl red, a spray of carnations across quartz glaze, signed, in the corner, with a discreet initial. It's not anonymous anymore. It's personal, and yet the tile doesn't shout. It whispers, like they always have. It's late now. The city has quieted, and you find yourself alone beneath a tiled dome. One final visit, one last look. This isn't a palace or a museum. It's a small neighborhood mosque tucked behind a row of fruit stalls and bakeries, the kind of place where shoes are always left in neat rows, where the floors creak softly, where prayers echo not in grandeur, but in comfort. You lie back on the carpet, gaze up, and let the ceiling unfold. The tiles above you have aged. Some have dulled slightly, others are chipped at the edges. The blues have softened into smoke. The red bowl isn't vivid anymore, but it glows, subtly, quietly, like an ember remembered. From this angle, you see the full orchestration, vines that climb, split, reunite, tulips blooming outward, not for display, but for balance. The script circling the base of the dome curves so naturally. It could be wind. Every pattern leads into another. Every line speaks to its neighbor. No voice is louder than the rest. You think back to your first brushstroke in the workshop, how clumsy your hand was, how quiet the room, how hard it was to understand why so much care went into such small things. And yet, here you are, years, centuries, patterns later, still looking up. Historians still argue what Ottoman tile painting means. A symbol of empire, a triumph of aesthetic, a lost language of spiritual math. You decide not to choose, because in this moment, it's none of those things. It's just rhythm, repetition, curve and space and light. Someone, long ago, sat right where you're sitting now. They mixed cobalt in silence, traced vines in reverence, fired clay and waited days just to see if the glaze would hold. And they probably never imagined this tile would outlive empires, that it would survive fires, floods, markets, borders, that it would end up here, under the eye of someone breathing a little slower, listening a little longer. You reach up, not to touch, but to feel. The ceiling hums back, not loudly, not clearly, but it hums. Then you close your eyes and let yourself sleep. Let the patterns soften now. Let the vines uncoil in your mind, curling into a gentle fade. The tulips bend inward, slow and still, petals folding into themselves like breath easing from lungs. The glazes lose their shine, not from dullness, but from distance, and the reds, that stubborn, brilliant red, settles into the warmth of memory. You are far from the workshop now, far from kilns and pigment bowls, far from domes and scrolls and calligraphic curves, but their rhythm remains with you. The slow repetition, the careful layering, the hush between each brushstroke. You carry it without even realizing. This is what time does to art. It weathers it, softens it, wears it down just enough to make it feel like part of the earth. But even when colors fade, the care remains in every tile, in every line, in every patient. Deliberate pause. So breathe in, slow and easy. You've spent a long, slow day tracing centuries with your eyes, with your hands, with your thoughts. There's nothing left to understand. No more pigments to grind, no more patterns to align. The workshop is dark now. The kiln is cool. The brushes sleep in their cups. And you're already drifting downward, inward, into the quiet spaces where stories settle, into the stillness between patterns, into the part of your mind that glows like bowl beneath glaze. No need to follow now, no need to rise. Just let yourself fall, let yourself rest, and let the tiles whisper.